How is everyone doing? It is myself, Jeff Black. I'm joined with Brandon DeCruz as always. And today we have a special guest, a colleague, a good friend of mine that I've been podcasting with for almost 4 years now. Don't get me wrong, Jeffrey Sue and I have had our interesting trivia trials along our way. But if we talk about one of the most respected coaches we could have brought on the podcast, it was Jeff. When Brandon brought the idea to me, I said, absolutely. So today is episode 56, The Skinny on Semaglutide with Jeffrey Sue. So we're going to talk about GLP-1 receptor agonists, pros and cons of Ozempic and WEGOVY. I actually have a little insight in that product. I've had some clients use it. I've used it myself, and I'm curious to see where this conversation is going. I know that Jeff is well versed in this topic, but Jeff, we have a very similar tradition here, like we do on the Excellence Cartel. We kind of go over how our last week has been. I'm actually going to fire this one off really good. I got my book review back. I met with my editor team. I have less than 1 hour of editing. That's it.
Let's go.
And it was all grammar. And there was one paragraph. They're like, we think you're trying to say one thing and it came away differently. So they gave me some feedback, but I'm real fucking proud of that, man, to take 100,000 words, chop it to 67,000 and then only have an hour worth of work to do. And they're like, hey, this is a strong draft. Like they're moving forward. I get the book cover. I meet with my publicist Friday, just all sorts of like really cool opportunities. And I'll be honest, man, like I've been working with Jeff on my social media, and it's just sometimes tough for me because I see a lot of fake ass motherfuckers. Like I know who they are privately, and it makes me want to punch them in the fucking throat. Like, I'm just like, you're not who you say you are. Like, I actually know you. I observe you like in the wild, and you're nothing like the fuck you're saying. And it just seems like there's all these pissing contests for marketing and shit like that. And everybody's forgotten what the core of coaching really is anymore. And the core of coaching is, can you get the fucker to believe in themselves or not? Because if you can't do that, it doesn't matter if they need flushing, don't need flushing, have overactive immune disorder, have this, have that. If you can't get them to believe in anything you are saying, then it doesn't matter. And some people need witchcraft spoken, and some people need simple terms spoken, and some people, it's just a mess, man. And I'll be honest, I'm kind of glad I'm going in a different direction for a minute with my book, and I get to go into a different realm, and I get to play over there for a little bit and get insulted and hopefully make some cool learning lessons. But the last little bit of good news I wanted to share, fly out in August to California, and I'm filming with Steven Pressfield for an entire day. We're going to go to Gold's Gym, work out together. He's like, you'll kill me. And I'm like, oh, we'll be fine. Don't worry. It's okay, Steven. We'll be good. And then we're just going to talk. I'm bringing my videographer out there, Sam, who's been shooting all the content for Relentless Forever. And I just got more videos back, and that stuff's starting to turn out to be really, really good. I'm getting more comfortable in front of a camera. So I'm going to interview him, and then we're going to have stuff for the book. And it's just a once in a lifetime opportunity because that book Turning Pro really put a lot of things in perspective. And I lost a lot of relationships because I turned pro. And that's why that book means so much to me. So it's once in a lifetime opportunity. I'm super stoked about that. All my stuff is all to do with my book, but my last 7 days have been great. Jeff, what's up with you in your last 7 days?
Not too much. I mean, I've been cranking it on social media again. I mean, I kind of took a little break. I take breaks as needed. I just kind of
What's a break look like to you?
I just don't post as much on my feed. I don't share as much in my head. I just kind of marinate in my own thoughts and, try to keep them to myself. And then when I feel like, being social and sharing, the thoughts that I've sort of sorted through and be able to put them into words, I will go out there and I'll throw it out there for people to see if they agree with it or they disagree or whatever. So I've been posting a lot more recently, sharing my thoughts, my workouts, client transformations, what goes behind those transformations. I'm working on a new class to be released at the end of June, nutrition therapies for the general population. So I'm feeling pretty motivated again. So it's good. Just ebbs and flows,
Yeah. What is the nutritional therapies class over?
It's going to be about like different methods that don't involve tracking calories or macros or quantifying your food intake in any way that you can deploy on general population clients to get them to hook into a new habit and start to be more confident and consistent and compliant. So there are many different tricks and tools that I've kind of messed with over the last couple of years that I've been seeing consistent results to the point now where I can teach it and offer them as solutions to other coaches.
What's your cost to do that?
It's $200.
Okay. And how can people get a hold of you?
Just go to my link tree on my social media and you can sign up for the class. I have about 17 filled as of now. I'm taking 30.
I might bug you for the recording after I start because even I'm intrigued at what you would think of that and if it would be similar to what I think. It's always nice to have, even at 18, 19 years of doing this, different perspectives or different ways of saying things. Like when I go to seminars, I'm looking for one sentence or one paragraph to make me sway a decision. I'm not looking for an entire presentation. So thanks. Go ahead.
One thing I will, a nugget here, a piece of free advice is something that I call intermittent frameworks. And what I mean by that is applying a short and quick and intense framework intermittently scattered throughout the coaching process that encourages faster results. So for example, that might be asking a client, say, hey, do you think you could just track your macros for just one day? Or do you think you could do protein veggies only just for one day? Or fast until 3 p.m. and only consume 800 calories for your dinner, just once a week. And most people will say, yeah, I love the challenge of doing this for just one day. Because here's the thing, motivation is always super high. People are always like, I can do this. But then it's like weeks into it, it fades. So you take advantage of that motivation, hook it when it's really high. And that one day is enough to push, provided that the rest of the approach is very balanced and they're fairly consistent with it.
Yeah, as long as they don't undereat their issues or other little things that you're working with. Yeah. No, that's some really good insight. Thanks for sharing that perspective.
Yeah.
My boy B, what's been up with your last 7, dude?
What's going on? All right. Just to hit on something that Jeffrey Sue hit on, I really like the what you hit on with the intermittent frameworks, because really when it comes down to coaching, we have to realize that we have people from all walks of life, and essentially we have to realize that sometimes we're coaching someone to live. So for instance, if someone's coming to us for weight loss maintenance, we're teaching them how to live their life now and sustaining certain habits and frameworks within that. But there's also a time and place for more advanced strategies and interventions where we're trying to advance the application of more nuanced topics and more nuanced strategies, where we're pushing things really to get them to a specific end goal. But I really like how you contextualized the fact that you're doing things that are reinforcing motivation, because if we look at like self-determination theory, we see competence. We want to reinforce competence, relatedness, and things of that sort, and autonomy. And really the competence aspect can be done within a day or within a week of doing something where a client is able to see, hey, listen, I previously had never tracked my food or had never been consistent with it because the thought of doing so was overwhelming. However, when you break it down to one day, we're being where our feet are, essentially. We're in the moment and we're able to just focus on the task at hand, one meal at a time. And oftentimes I try to get that approach across as even some of my competitors, where obviously it's a more advanced as well as a more aggressive strategy. However, if you guys can just, just for the audience and for coaches out there, if you could just break things down into a task specific goals where it's taking one meal at a time, one day at a time, one workout, one walk, like you break these things up and make them into micro goals that add up to the end result. Because really when we think about being more process oriented, that's really what you were reinforcing, being process oriented over outcome oriented. Because a lot of times when someone's strictly focused on the outcome and the results that they're looking for, they lose sight of the process and they don't focus on that, and they're only trying to go from point A to point Z and not realizing that the process is what's going to get them there.
Right. Absolutely.
I agree 100%. So B, you wanted to bring Jeff on to talk about semaglutide. Jeff has a very extensive background on this. I know he was on J3 University with John Jewett discussing this. But the topic today is GLP-1s, such as Ozempic, WEGOVY, semaglutide, all those beautiful names. What exactly is a GLP-1, Jeff? Like what, at its core, like why is this medication suddenly taking off? Because it's been around for a long time and now all of a sudden it's just fire.
Yeah, well, first I want to preface that I'm not a doctor, obviously, so this isn't any medical advice.
Oh, come on!
Yeah, this is for informational and educational purposes only.
Well, no, I like doing a lot of reading, so I have like endocrinology textbooks and things I'll buy and I'll read and I'll cross-reference them with studies. So that's why I know all this stuff. Anybody has access to these things, so I'm by no means an expert at it. But basically, the drug semaglutide, otherwise known as Ozempic, is a GLP-1 receptor agonist. GLP stands for glucagon-like peptide 1, and they are hormones or incretin mimetics. So what they do is they increase the beta cell responsiveness to produce insulin in response to glucose that's ingested. So, for many reasons and, in many different diseases and applications, the body may not function as it should. So this GLP-1 RA, the RA stands for receptor agonist. And so we know that hormones have to act as keys and locks. So a receptor is the lock and a hormone is the key. And an agonist is basically a fancy term for a copy of that key. So semaglutide is a GLP-1 RA, which acts as a copy of the body's natural GLP-1, which may not be functioning as properly.
Absolutely. So just to give a little insight to the audience, just so we can differentiate between what we're going to speak about in this podcast, which are GLP-1 receptor agonists, and then our own endogenous production of GLP-1, because this is a gut-derived peptide hormone that belongs, like you mentioned, it belongs to a family of hormones called incretins, and they're naturally released in response to eating. So it's produced mainly in our intestines, but we also find that it's secreted by the brain as well as by the alpha cells in the pancreas. And why I'm hitting on these things is because when Jeff goes over some of the effects of how these drugs work and interact and how they dock into different receptors, we're going to cover how they work and the different mechanisms of action. But really, when we look at this, it's a naturally produced hormone. So we all produce this in response to eating, and it plays several roles in the body. Jeff hit on this in terms of it increases insulin release, hence why they're called an incretin hormone. Increase insulin. It slows down the rate of gastric emptying. It interacts with the hypothalamus in the brain. So that's where we see GLP-1 production in the brain, specifically in the hypothalamus. So it's going to increase feelings of satiety. So really, we have our own endogenous production of GLP-1, and then we have the exogenous production of GLP-1. So Jeff, can you go through, in terms of the GLP-1, you covered what the receptor agonist is, but can you cover how they work a little bit in broader context?
Yeah. So I think first, I think most of our listeners here know what insulin and glucagon do. So insulin is a storage hormone. Glucagon kind of breaks down things, and glucagon and insulin are always at play. They're like seesawing back and forth all day to keep our body's glucose regulated at, let's say 75 to maybe 90 milligrams per deciliter. That's where most people tend to sit. So we know about insulin sensitivity and resistance. We know that, if you eat, a lot of processed foods, you can develop insulin resistance, metabolic disease, all these things. We know that these foods are bad for cases like PCOS, but why? Right? So if you think about it, is it really the carbs that are bad? Are there really foods that are good versus bad? Or is it how our bodies respond to that food, which is then good or bad? I would argue that if, let's say, any of us here, we're very lean individuals who don't have any gut issues, no hormonal issues or whatever. We're fairly healthy young men, right? Young, I say that young, relatively. So any of us could probably go out and smash like half a pizza and be okay. We wouldn't do it often, but we'd be okay. Now, someone else who has metabolic resistance, insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, that could be a completely different story, okay? So the reason why we respond differently to different types of foods is actually because of certain cells in our digestive tract, specifically the small intestine. So the small intestine is comprised of the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. And that's in order of, proximity to your mouth, to the ileum being the most distal part, which is distant from the mouth. So you have these cells that are called the K cells that are higher up in the small intestine, so in the duodenum. Then you have these L cells, which are lower in the ileum. And so when you think about it, when you eat food, like let's say a fast digesting handful of jelly beans, the jelly beans are probably going to react more with the K cells because they break down faster and the K cells are stimulated more. And the K cells they release something called GIP, which is a glucose-dependent insulinotropic polypeptide. That's what GIP stands for. The L cells, where you eat a bowl of oatmeal and it slowly breaks down, it probably won't interact. Glucose won't interact with the K cells because it takes time to break down. And by the time it breaks down, it interacts primarily with the L cells. And the L cells produce glucagon-like peptide 1. And so GIP has been associated more with dyslipidemia, metabolic disease, insulin resistance, all these bad things. It does have positive effects on bone. However, GLP is the one that modulates insulin release best from the beta cells of the pancreas. So you want more L cell reactivity when you're eating food. Therefore, complex carbs are quote unquote better for you.
Absolutely. All right. So just from like a broad-based perspective, just so the audience realizes, like the actions that Jeff is hitting on, essentially what a GLP-1 receptor agonist and how it works is, like he was mentioning with the small intestines, essentially it's going to slow down like some of the mechanisms of action. Essentially, it's inhibiting gut contractions. So it's slowing, like I mentioned, that gastric emptying. So that's gonna influence insulin and glucagon release. But also think about it, if we're delaying gastric emptying, this is gonna slow down nutrients. So like Jeff was hitting on with the complexity of carbohydrates, with a slower digesting carbohydrate like an oatmeal, something like that, we're seeing delayed gastric emptying as compared to jelly beans. But also in terms of how these drugs work, it essentially is going to slow down the transit time of all nutrients. And so within that, what that's going to do is it's going to essentially increase transit time in the gut, which is going to lead to a greater increase in satiety. Because think about it, even just logically from a food's perspective, we're going to get more satiety out of something that contains fiber and is slower digesting, like oatmeal, 50 grams of oatmeal as compared to 50 grams of jelly beans. Right. And then it's also going to slower glucose absorption. So that's another dual pronged benefit, because when we actually go into who is, we're going to go into this next, but who is these drugs designed for? We're going to see a lot of anti-diabetic applications. And so it has all these downstream effects. And then when we hear about all these, claims about, semaglutide or specifically WEGOVY is the version that we would utilize for weight loss, because, Ozempic, which that's what many people are alluding to, that's actually only approved for type 2 diabetes. And so within that, when we look at GLP-1, how it actually works to interact or how it influences weight loss is through the fact that it acts on the hypothalamus in the brain and it essentially increases satiety. But we would get that through our own release of GLP-1, just like in the case that Jeff alluded to, where he was talking about the oatmeal as compared to the jelly beans. We all have been there where we've done If It Fits Your Macros and we utilize, a fast digesting, carbohydrate, and we notice that we don't get the same feeling of satiation or fullness from that quick digesting source as compared to the oatmeal. So these are, we're kind of comparing and contrasting endogenous GLP-1 production, which we all have went through an experience, and then what someone on a GLP-1 agonist or receptor agonist is going to experience. And so another just aspect that I want to hit on, because I know that we had a question in the audience about this, is they said, how is it increasing insulin sensitivity if it's increasing insulin? So Jeff, I'm gonna let you take that, but also I just want to hit on the fact that a lot of people don't realize. So they think about it like insulin, like the insulin theory hypothesis of obesity, and how like increasing in insulin is shutting off lipolysis, it's not allowing for fat burning. But really, when it comes down to it, we see that insulin it interacts with the hypothalamus first and foremost, and it actually is a satiety hormone. So this increase in insulin that we get from an incretin hormone like GLP-1 or like a GLP-1 receptor agonist actually increases feelings of fullness. So it's dual pronged. But Jeff, if you could just cover a little bit how this increase in insulin, because a lot of people hear that off the bat and they're like, I don't want a faster increase in insulin. How is this leading to a benefit from GLP-1 receptor agonists?
Yeah. Well, first of all, with the examples of the 50 grams of carbs worth coming from oatmeal versus jelly beans, that's what the glycemic index is all about. The glycemic index is literally measured by taking 50 grams of a source of carbohydrate and measuring the blood glucose and insulin response 2 hours postprandial. And of course, we have glycemic load, which is the number of grams you consume of carbohydrate multiplied by the glycemic index, and you put those in parentheses and you divide by 100. So those are, basically calculations of the effects of the K and L cells, which I briefly touched on when we first began. But to answer your question about how some people think that, the GLP-1 RAs increasing insulin isn't doing a positive for insulin sensitivity, they're not understanding insulin sensitivity and resistance properly, because an insulin sensitive person doesn't need high amounts of insulin floating around to take care of their blood glucose. They're sensitive, so they're efficient. When you are resistant, the cells aren't listening to the hormones. So the beta cells keep pounding insulin, pounding at the door with the key saying, hey, let us in to shove that glucose in. And then you see fasted blood insulin being like 18, 19, 20. And then they're covering glucose at like 90 versus an insulin sensitive person. Their fasted insulin reads like a 2 to a 6, and their blood glucose is like a 75 to an 85. That's sensitivity versus resistance.
Absolutely. I appreciate you breaking that down because that's a misconception. Sometimes people just get like this little clip of, they have they hear something in the media or they see something on
Mm.
Instagram and they see the fact that it's an incretin hormone and increases insulin. They say, well, how is that leading to fat loss or how is that increasing insulin sensitivity? When we look at it, it's increasing insulin action. It's allowing us to become more insulin sensitive and it's also disposing of glucose more efficiently. So that's where we're
Right.
seeing within these trials, we're seeing drastic decreases in HbA1c and other indices of insulin sensitivity and insulin resistance. So Jeffrey, now that we've went through, the class of GLP-1 receptor agonist drugs and how they work, can you cover some of the different forms of semaglutide? Because there are various forms, so people oftentimes will get them confused. And then also, what we're seeing in the research in regard to semaglutide and the effects that these drugs are having, specifically on weight loss, because that's what it's becoming more prominent or popular for.
Yeah. So to talk about the GLP-1 RA drug class in general, they've been around for a while, several years actually, and I think
Yeah.
there are like 7 or 8 of them on the market, and they all differ in terms of their half-lives, and therefore their half-lives, then predicate, or determine what side effects that you experience in terms of your hunger suppression, your GI distress that could be caused by some of these drugs. So semaglutide, for example, has a fairly long half-life. There are other ones that only have a half-life of maybe 2 to 4 hours. But before I go on about the other stuff about this class of drugs, we also need to touch on something called DPP-4. So DPP-4 stands for dipeptidyl peptidase 4, and it is an enzyme that degrades GLP. Okay, so it's almost like an on and off switch. GLP-1 is the on switch. DPP-4 is the off switch. So if you have too much off switch going on, you're basically shutting down GLP-1's actions on the beta cells of the pancreas. So there are another class of drugs which basically do the same thing that a drug like semaglutide would do. They're called DPP-4 inhibitors. So all these DPP-4 inhibitors, they end in so there's semaglutide ends in tide, okay, and then the DPP-4 inhibitors end in gliptin. So if you ever see a drug with a last name gliptin, it's a DPP-4 inhibitor. Okay, so these GLP-1, the natural GIP and GLP-1s don't really have a long half-life to begin with. So DPP-4 degrades them, and then that's what shuts down the insulin release from the pancreas. Now, these drugs like semaglutide and all the other tied, suffix drugs, they are resistant to DPP-4 degradation. So therefore, you have a prolonged effect of these incretin mimetics. Now, in terms of like who it's for, I mean, it's been approved for diabetes. It's still not approved for PCOS. There are a lot of different diseases that have their cross ties within insulin resistance and sensitivity that, this is like an off-label use in terms of putting in these incretin mimetics. There's a lot of risk to that. We can touch upon that. One of them being that they may encourage anorexia in some people because they actually stimulate a part of the brain that is stimulated by like cocaine and amphetamines. It's called the CART, C-A-R-T. And by stimulating that, you actually induce anorectic behaviors, which is what anorexia comes from.
Very interesting. Yeah. So when we actually look at who are these useful for, so if we take it back to some of the literature on this, initially these drugs were utilized for type 2 diabetes. So really what the medical orthodoxy has utilized them for is for the prevention or the treatment of type 2 diabetes. And really, when we actually look at the medical classifications, I want to differentiate this a little bit because we see in the media that like a lot of celebrities are using these drugs and they're using them off label. They're using them for weight loss. And that's where we actually look at the forms. When we hear semaglutide, that is the broad-based classification of the peptide in and of itself. Then we have different forms of it that are under different trademark names. So we look at Ozempic, that is, medically prescribed for type 2 diabetes. Then we have Rybelsus, which is an oral form, which can also be utilized for type 2 diabetes. And then we have WEGOVY, which just recently was approved for weight loss. But still, it's not something that's it's going to be medically approved. However, it's not going to be covered by insurance because weight loss is still within the category of a cosmetic effect, essentially, which in terms of how the medical insurance companies are labeling it. However, when we actually look at the classifications or who is approved to utilize semaglutide or who is the best candidate for it in terms of the medical system, it's people that have a BMI over 30 or they have a BMI over 27 with a comorbidity. So generally what that's going to be is a BMI over 27 with something like type 2 diabetes, or even they have it with obstructive sleep apnea. So these are the only people that are going to be able to get these medically prescribed without being it off label and actually get it approved and covered by insurance, which is one of the things we'll cover later. Some of the drawbacks to this, it's a very, very expensive drug, and we'll go through a little bit more of the details behind it. But when it comes down to it, when we look at actually, some of the why are people utilizing this? And I think to touch on this, maybe we could go through some of the, not only the effects, like how they work, but some of like the outcomes that we're actually looking at. So, Jeff, if you could elaborate on some of like the effects we see in the research in terms of the outcomes, and why are people hearing about this? Why has it become so popular as the last couple of years? Because we've had weight loss drugs for decades. However, this has become like the new kid on the block, and there's a reason for it. But we're going to extrapolate later on down the road as to maybe it's not the most useful form of it, or we should really be more selective in who really pursues this drug intervention.
Yeah, I mean, I've always wondered why people keep posting about semaglutide and not like exenatide and liraglutide, and why not talk about sitagliptin? Why aren't those even being mentioned? Why is it just semaglutide? I don't know. I think it was maybe like a celebrity like the Kardashians or something. I think it probably appeared in an article out there, and then it made its way through Silicon Valley. A lot of the CEOs, executives out there use that, and then it made its way into the fitness world. And now everyone's talking about it, but I haven't seen anybody really like weigh all the pros and cons and all the options. I don't think a lot of people even know about what DPP-4 does. So that concerns me in terms of our industry and the talking heads out there. But in general, the receptors for GLP-1 are everywhere in the body. So you have them in the pancreas, obviously, because of the beta cells. You have them in your GI tract because obviously, the K and L cells there are producing them. And there are other receptors that will react to the hormone. They are in your heart. They're in your lungs. Reason why heart rate goes up is because GLP-1 receptors are actually in the sinoatrial node, which is a natural pacemaker of your heart. One of the reasons why this drug will, decrease appetite. Number one, like I mentioned, it stimulates that CART. But it also will suppress parasympathetic vagal tone. So if you think about, you do a hard leg workout, really, really hard, and you try to sit down and eat a big meal, you won't have any appetite to eat. You won't be able to digest. Your stomach acid is going to be all fucked up. So that's basically an intense way of describing how you would feel when you're on this drug, when you have suppressed parasympathetic vagal tone.
Very interesting. Yeah, I know that the nausea, we'll go through some of like the adverse side effects, but that is one of the most reported and commonly experienced side effects of this drug. And now within it, we can open this up, to all three of us. What do you see? Who would you think, besides like the medical classifications that I went over just previously, who do you think is a good candidate for semaglutide or some of these GLP-1 receptor agonists? And we can go on a roundtable and just, give some ideas as to who we see it appropriate for, or who we've seen maybe in the medical literature that it be applied to and that it's really appropriate for. So Jeffrey, I'll let you start off and then we can go all around.
Yeah. I think it has a wide range of applications. I think it's easier to talk about what the contradictions are. So, there's been studies that show that a specific type of thyroid cancer, if you're prone to this specific type, you shouldn't use it. I'm not saying, and the literature does not say, that semaglutide or GLP-1 RAs cause thyroid cancer. That is not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is if you have a specific type, I forget the exact type, but it's a risk factor. If you are older, you have acute pancreatitis, chronic pancreatitis, you will need to probably stay away from this drug because it can cause acute pancreatitis even in healthy individuals. People who have eating disorder tendencies, bulimia, anorexia, that was in your past, you probably have some sort of dysregulation in your neurotransmitters, that CART area of your brain. Again, that cocaine and amphetamine regulated transcript, I think it's called. Those people should not use it. And that's my main concern, because this is being used in bodybuilding. I'm sure some prep coaches are trying to use it. And we all know that a lot of people who are physique enthusiasts and competitors have disordered eating. And that's where it really gets tricky because of how many areas these drugs touch upon. The side effects are unpredictable in many cases.
No, absolutely. I'm really glad you hit on that, because really when I think about this, and I've received many questions from whether it be clients or it be listeners of the show. And a lot of times these are people that are in great shape. So if you're not someone who's obese or diabetic, this really isn't a drug classification you really should even be going after. And one, common type of individual that I get this question about these drugs from is chronic dieters. And here's the thing, like what we have to realize, and I know that you two can relate to this, having worked with countless amount of chronic dieters, if you've already induced metabolic adaptation from under eating, going on a drug that's going to suppress your appetite all the more is not going to undo those adaptations or get you into a better place. It's going to leave you more predisposed to lean body mass loss. It's going to give you more predisposed towards being more likely to engage in those disordered eating behaviors that you've had. Another big thing is when we go over like the side effects in a little bit, like people with digestive issues, this is not par for the course. This is only going to make things worse, especially if you're someone that has like gastroparesis. So if you have someone that already has slow motility, like I spoke about some of the effects of GLP-1 receptor agonists, it slows the transit time of your food. So if you're already having issues getting food through your digestive tract, this medication is only going to make it worse. Other issues that we see within literature on GLP-1 receptor agonists and some of the downsides, because I want to really hit on this because I always like to be objective with both sides. Great effects on appetite. They have great weight loss outcomes. We're seeing generally, 12 to 15% body weight loss in a lot of these trials that are long-term. However, it is an impressive amount of weight loss. However, we do have to highlight some of the downsides or who it's not appropriate for. And that's where we look into more of like the randomized control trials. We see that people with a history of gallstones or gallbladder issues should not be using these drugs. Jeff, like you mentioned, people with a history or at a risk of pancreatitis, another thing, someone that has cholestasis. So if we have slowing or like the stalling of bile flow through your biliary system, it can, cause a problem in the liver, essentially with your bile ducts. So these are all implications. Then another thing, Jeff, that you've been alluding to in terms of how the natural relationship between GLP-1 and DPP-4 inhibitor or DPP-4 works is if you're someone on a DPP-4 inhibitor, what a lot of people don't realize is they're trying to stack all these drugs. I mean, we come from, it's almost like an industry of polypharmacy. People are using Adderall with this, and they're using, PEDs with weight loss drugs like this. And what they don't realize is the DPP-4 inhibitors, which I'm sure you can elaborate on more than I can. However, they only work on endogenous GLP-1. So if you utilize them and they've done trials on this, where they look at them in conjunction, where they put a person on a dual medication or, a dual intervention, where they're utilizing a strong GLP-1 inhibitor and they're utilizing a DPP-4 inhibitor and looking for, are they going to have greater weight loss outcomes? As a result, are they going to be able to sustain a longer duration of the GLP-1 in the system and get all those benefits of, increasing insulin sensitivity, increased half-life in terms of appetite suppression? They don't, because they don't work. They have similar actions in terms of increasing insulin release and delaying gastric emptying, but DPP-4 inhibitors as a classification of drugs only works on your endogenous production of GLP-1. So if you're trying to mix and match these things, you're kind of just you're throwing more things, and seeing what sticks, and you're not getting a better thing you're not getting a better outcome out of the equation. So really, when it comes down to it, we have to realize that despite this drug getting so much popularity and so much, media coverage around it, this isn't a quick fix or an all-inclusive solution. You know what I mean? Like this drug really, works on decreasing appetite, but, that's only while you're taking the drug. So we really have to make sure that habits are in place and that you have some of these background things, really aligned, because if not, we're going to see some of the deleterious side effects that we see in terms of some of the potential side effects, the drawbacks, and the downsides of using semaglutide.
Jeff, what is the typical dosage for these? Because I've heard people saying they take a full syringe. I've heard full syringes mentioned multiple times a week. So is it depending upon the drug? How do they titrate it up? I know you titrate it up or get sick from it. So I have a little experience with it. I've used it here and there, small doses. So 20 IUs out of 100 IUs on the insulin needle. And what I did before is push what?
That's like 2 milligrams, I think.
Yeah, small dosing. And what it was for is, when you go through did it few months back, and it was because after doing all my preps too, I was just always hungry. It didn't matter if I was in a bulk. It didn't matter if I was in a cut. It didn't matter if I just ate. It didn't matter if I did anything. I was just miserably hungry. And it kind of shut it off and allowed me to be like, cool. And I think in all honesty, it helped me. And that's why my prep's been so good, because that kind of got reset naturally, you know? So I wasn't like going into prep, like already miserable as shit. Like, well, cheers to 16 weeks of hell. You know what I mean? So I wonder if there is some use to it in the physiques side of it when you're trying to reset things. Because if you're going to, like Brandon was alluding to, the chronic dieting, if you're a chronic competitor, okay, you know, those hunger cues, no matter what you do, are going to be screwed up after a little bit. I've been doing this shit since I was 15, and I can tell you that I've always had some miscues as I look back over it. But what is the dosing, and where do you think that people get jammed with it?
Well, most of them are dosed subcutaneously, so it's an injection that you do once a week, twice a week, depending on the drug. From what I've read, I think it's 1 milligram that you start off with, 1 to 2 semaglutide, and then you can titrate upwards. It's important to titrate up because the side effects can be fairly strong depending on the individual. So, you know,
yeah, you get nauseous as shit. That happened on that 10 I took for the first 2 weeks. I was like, what?
Yeah, slowly increasing it,
Yeah.
you get side effects. But you know, when you were talking about post show and people binging and you know, regaining weight, this is where this drug could be misapplied, because some people may desire to maintain their post show physique and stay leaner and suppress their hunger cues. And we have to remember that, especially let's say for women, hunger cues are there to bring your body fat back up to a nice place where your menstrual cycle comes back and is healthy. You have to regain some body fat. So when you are artificially suppressing the natural cues to eat with this drug, you are also causing a lot of downstream negative effects that will bite you later on. This is why I think, like, with the wrong type of person, and there are a lot of wrong types of people in our industry, especially with the competition world, this drug will just be like a gateway to neurotic behaviors and eating disorders. It's just not. And the thing is, it's like, you know, when it's combined with fasting and, you know, low carb diet, it's because this drug allows you to then be able to execute these extreme ways of eating, which otherwise your brain would fight back. Your leptin and ghrelin, hunger signaling would all fight back and basically sabotage such an extreme approach. But this drug allows you to do it. That's why we're seeing a lot of weight loss. So
yeah, I've heard about that. I've heard that that's how some of them are inducing some of the fasting protocols and things like that, is to get it where they're just not hungry. So therefore you could easily do 24, 48 plus day hour fast or whatever.
this is no different to me than HCG diets that came about in the early 2000s. Everyone was talking about HCG plus a 500 calorie diet. And then,
well, now we can't even get HCG. So
yeah, exactly. You're gonna have a pregnant woman pee in your mouth, you know? So
Jeez. Wow. Okay.
no, but really to open up on some of the things that both of you guys hit on, really when it comes down to it, one of the biggest side effects or negative drawbacks that we see with this drug is weight regain. So we have to think about it. Say that we're utilizing in this post-show phase, or that you're utilizing it as your only intervention for, you know, inducing weight loss. We see a high likelihood of weight regain after stopping the use of semaglutide. So this is not a panacea. This isn't like I take it once or I take it for a continued period of time, I lose my weight, I'm going to maintain it. Because in the trials, in those without diabetes, semaglutide generally leads to a weight loss, or an average of 12 to 15% of weight loss, which is an impressive loss. We can all see that. But most of these trials are over a year. You know, with the most prominent trial was the step 1 trial, which was 68 weeks in length. And if we think about it from a coaching perspective, many of us have achieved similar weight loss with clients with much shorter time frames. So think about that, guys, in like a weekly rate of loss average. You know, it's 15% that they're losing at the top end over 68 weeks. That's 17 months. So that's a pretty slow rate of loss, still impressive nonetheless. However, you know, we do so in a coaching perspective by improving someone's habits and behaviors around nutrition, their training, their movement. And that allows for not only better weight loss, but also better weight loss maintenance after the dieting phase has ended. However, with something like semaglutide, if you have not nailed in your habits, your behaviors, your nutritional approach, and things of that sort, we see wild, weight regain. So, just to go over some of the literature on this so that we can, a lot of times people are only looking at the weight loss literature in terms of the semaglutide trials, which show weight loss, but they're not looking at the trials that look at what happens after the fact. What happens when people discontinue the use of semaglutide? And so just this past year, there was a study by Wilding et al. Where this was after the step one trial. So the step one trial essentially was where they compared a group which received a once weekly 2.4 milligram injection of semaglutide for weight loss with a placebo injection group. And both groups received both nutritional and lifestyle counseling, which essentially went over their diet, their movement, their physical activity, interventions, and strategies for all 68 weeks of the trial. And then what Wilding and colleagues did was they did a trial extension where they looked at weight regain and the cardiometabolic effects after discontinuing semaglutide use. Because a lot of times what we hear about is only the weight loss outcomes and the improvements in cardiometabolic indices or in insulin sensitivity. But we don't hear about what happens after the fact. Is this really something that's going to be a solution for your problems? And in this trial extension, they took a portion of the semaglutide group, which had been on the drug for 68 weeks, and followed them for another 52 weeks. So for another year without the drug. So they took them off the drug and they had them just follow them throughout the course. And they still had the lifestyle and the like dietary intervention. However, they no longer had the drug. So they no longer had the impetus to stay, on their diet and things of that sort. And the average weight loss in this group was 17% of their body weight initially. So over the course of, 68 weeks, they lost 17% of their body weight. However, over the next year of this follow-up, this group regained 11.7% of the weight that they had lost. So they essentially were down to a net total of 5.6%, which amounts to a weight regain of almost 70% of their total weight loss. So we see just within a year, less time than they were actually on the trial, they've almost gained 70% of this. And then what's interesting about this, and a lot of people I haven't heard anyone talking about this in particular, but they also looked at the cardiometabolic improvements these individuals had made during the 68 weeks of semaglutide use, and they found that these reverted back to their baseline metrics, so back to where they were originally, within 1 year of not using the drug. So this led them to conclude that 1 year of withdrawal of once weekly semaglutide injections at 2.4 milligrams and a lifestyle intervention, they regained more than 2/3 of their initial weight loss, and they also saw similar changes within their cardiometabolic variables essentially. And so within this, they said that either this has to be an ongoing treatment to maintain the improvements you make, or you have to reinforce them with lifestyle intervention. So this isn't like choosing between coaching and semaglutide for weight loss. It's like you need to have a multifactorial approach where you're really reinforcing habits, behaviors, your approach to everything, and not just relying on this drug. And this is a scary aspect that I see a lot of people going to, where it's like they almost look at this as like their get out of jail free card or the end all be all drug for weight loss. And it's like, if you're someone that has been struggling with weight loss for a continued period of time, believe me, I'm empathetic towards you. However, you really need to not only just try to throw a drug in the mix and use that as your solution. You need to work through multifactorial approach towards weight loss and weight loss maintenance.
I agree completely. People say, oh, I've tried everything and I still can't get the weight off. But in 99% of the conversations I've had with clients, trying everything, they have not tried everything. And they have not done everything consistently 100%. So I would encourage people to go back and try again under my coaching care and make sure that they really are trying everything before resorting to something like this. What's interesting too is like I've never heard of a GIP inhibitor, because remember when we first started talking, we talked about GLP-1 and GIP, that glucose dependent insulin tropic polypeptide. There was a study done where they deleted the receptors, the GIPR, in mice. And they fed them like a crazy, like high calorie, high sugar diet, and they didn't develop insulin resistance or any sort of metabolic syndrome because they lost the receptors to GIP. So I don't know if there is an inhibitor of GIP, just like there's an inhibitor of DPP-4, but I think that would actually be more effective than the GLP-1 RAs.
So actually, if we really look at it, so if we look at the newest classification, which a lot of people are looking at, is Mounjaro. And Mounjaro is a dual intervention drug. So it's actually GLP-1 plus a GIP. And so within that, when we actually look at head-to-head trials of Mounjaro versus, now keep in mind, guys, Mounjaro has not been approved for weight loss. It's not being looked at in clinical studies, but when they look at it for diabetes management and remission, and they look at it head to head with GLP-1 or specifically semaglutide, they have more favorable outcomes in terms of, insulin resistance and things of that sort, as well as with weight loss, on the back end within using the dual medication. But this is even more, rare to find. So really what we're finding is a lot of people are utilizing these drugs like semaglutide for weight loss or cosmetic weight loss. And now we're having a shortage. And I'm sure if you guys work with any clients that actually have type 2 diabetes and actually need these drugs, one of the biggest issues with utilizing this for cosmetic weight loss, especially if you're not someone that's obese, if you don't have a BMI over 30, if you're not someone that's truly suffering with the lifestyle and health ramifications of, actual diagnosed obesity, having these drugs, you're getting them used off label. We're getting a shortage of the actual supply of these things. And now we're seeing the cost being driven up and up. And so what a lot of people, they will hit on is the fact that these are really, out of pocket for a lot of people. They're unsustainable. So for instance, the average, cost for semaglutide at a weight loss prescription dose is around $1,000 a month. So if we go back to the Wilding trial, which is the step 1 trial, in order to induce it was average of 14.9% weight loss over 17 months, that'd be a $17,000 investment off the bat. You know what I mean? To really get that clinical weight loss. So if you really think about it, we always have to weigh the pros with the cons. So a lot of times people are looking at only the pros that they hear of the celebrity that lost a lot of weight, or the person that has Ozempic face now, and their face is drawn and they have a really nice jawline, or they look at these type of things, but they're not looking at some of the downside ramification, side effects, and things of that sort.
Yeah, it's definitely a drug for a more affluent demographic. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the marketing that's out there, it's a very specific demographic that this is being marketed towards. And just like you said, people are selling this stuff. I've seen, peptide companies sell it. I'm seeing med spas sell it. Everyone's selling it. They want a piece of the pie here. It's just going to cause a lot of trouble downstream, I think.
Yeah, and not even to get into the economics of it, but I would argue, honestly, just from a nutritional aspect or just a lifestyle intervention aspect, almost like the most affluent individuals have the most resources. They're most likely the people that need it the least amount. Because if we really look at obesity statistics, we see that those that are disimpoverished or that are in lower socioeconomic status are those that are more likely to suffer from insulin resistance, from metabolic syndrome, from all, obesity, from all of these categories that would actually be classified for, an insurance company to pay for this. But now we're having a shortage of these things. Those in those lower socioeconomic statuses can't afford to get it off label. It should pay for it themselves, but they also are the class of individuals that need it the most. So it's kind of like we, not to get into the ethical aspects of it, but sometimes I'm getting reached out by people and they have an interest in this. And it's almost like, listen, like we already have a shortage of this drug. Like maybe you should think a little bit more about your decision or your interest in these type of things. And then also look at some of the other downsides. So, are there any other, downsides that you've seen to this drug or side effects that you'd like to cover, Jeffrey?
Aside from, the potential cardiac risk, any sort of GI dysfunction that would be contradicted. I just think if you are someone who is very, very overweight, like I'm talking like maybe like a 5'4" woman who's like 230, 240 pounds, you don't have any past disordered eating, any proclivities for eating disorders, no risk of thyroid cancer, pancreatic function is fine. I think in those cases, this could be a good drug to use to buy someone time and to build that success before they become motivated. And then you pull the drug off and you're working on the habits concurrently, then you let the habits take them to the finish line. So I think for that particular client avatar demographic, that would be it. Everyone else, I think they could just get by with good old training and cardio and being patient. That's what I
agree. When I recently got a question about this, so I want to pose it to you, and if not, I'll elaborate on it. But we were asked when I posted that we were having you on the show. This is just a last minute question, but they asked about have you seen anything to do with the fact that these are massive weight losses that we're seeing? Have you seen anything in terms of lean body mass loss with the usage of semaglutide? Because this is something we're hearing more and more about.
I haven't read any studies on that. Most of the studies that you're going to read about are going to be very, very overweight individuals because, like, as you know, we've talked about, this is a drug that is primarily targeted towards diabetes patients. So we're going to see a lot of very average people being studied. So I can't comment on the lean mass loss, but I would assume that, you know, if proper dieting measures were there, like for example, if you did like a protein sparing modified fast from like Ronald McDonald combined with semaglutide, your chances of retaining lean mass are probably pretty good. The metabolic effects of these drugs seem to be very positive. For example, I mean, even the adipokines, the basically the cytokine signaling from fat cells is suppressed, and
it
so
has anti-inflammatory effects.
It has anti-inflammatory effects. So you're anti-inflammatory, you're insulin sensitive. You know, I think it would just be like you're dieting hard for a contest, and all the systems are cranking optimally. You know,
Right.
and that you retain a lot of lean mass.
No, I'm glad you hit on that because you mentioned how you didn't see in a lot of the literature them reporting lean body mass loss. And so I went through every study I could find on this. I went through meta-analysis because we got this question. I wanted to be able to expand upon it. And you're correct. A lot of studies don't look at that. So the thing is, they're only reporting weight loss. But what we have to realize and we've talked about this on this show at least many times, there's a difference between weight loss and fat loss. And so fat loss would be compartmentalized of, you know, the retention of lean body mass as well as the loss of fat mass. And so when we actually look into the research, I dug in deep to find these things. And so when we actually look at the percentage loss in terms of weight loss differentiated between fat mass and fat-free mass, you know, a significant portion of weight loss that comes from semaglutide usage is actually from lean body mass loss. So for example, if we go back to the step 1 trial on semaglutide, they found, you know, when they did a follow-up study, they found that those in the semaglutide group lost 39% of their weight from lean body mass. So more than a third of their weight came from a loss in lean body mass. And this was done on DEXA, so this was the best that they could do in terms of the actual reportings on it. And now when we look at other reviews on this topic, and we look at GLP-1s as a broad-based category, there was a review on the effects of GLP-1s on lean body mass in humans. And they found that in half of the studies identified within this review, the proportion of lean body mass loss ranged from between 20 to 50% of total weight loss. So they had a proportion of, you know, you could be at the low end of losing 20% of your body weight from lean body mass, which is pretty average, but up to 50%, meaning half the weight that you lost was actually due to, you know, lean body mass loss. So remember, you know, you're losing weight and you're seeing this large weight loss at these end of these trials, but they could be coming from lean body mass. And then lastly, in a 2021 meta-analysis on the effects of anti-diabetic drugs, including semaglutide on muscle mass, they found that semaglutide causes a significant decrease in fat-free mass. So this is another thing, like we always have to come back and really look at these things, because a lot of times when individuals and they make an infographic or, you know, they speak on a study, you know, on social media or in a podcast or something, they don't really dig in. They only look at the abstract and the findings and the conclusion. But if you really go through the methods and you go through all these statistical analyses and stuff and nerd stuff like I did, you know, you start seeing that there's a little bit different of a story being told. And so a big thing with lean body mass loss is if you are someone that is older and you're not, you know, you're not in a point in your life where rebuilding lean body mass is going to be in your favor, or you're someone like a female and you're starting to see, due to the fact that you're going through menopause or you're outside of menopause, and you're starting to see an increased risk for osteoporosis due to the decrements in sex hormones like estradiol, which are so influential on, you know, bone density. We really want to make sure that we're protecting this lean body mass loss and not using this drug in a manner where we're just trying to get quick weight loss and only focus on the scale going down or the scale weight going down and not focusing on actual body composition. Because when we as coaches work with a client and they want weight loss, we hear them say that. We hear that they want 20 or 30 pounds off, but really we're looking at fat loss. We're looking for maximal muscle retention and maximum fat loss. And so maybe we might not be getting the amount of weight loss that they want, but we might be getting some, oftentimes we get body recomposition in the process. So when we look at these topics on weight loss and guys in our audience, if you see Instagram graphics or you see headlines in the media about this amount of weight loss by this celebrity, like keep in mind that weight loss and fat loss are not the same thing. And we really want to be aiming for what's called quality weight loss, which is the retention of, you know, lean body mass or muscle and the loss of purely fat mass.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
All right.
Jeff,
was there any?
No, I was actually going to say that was a really good podcast. I personally think it's going to be more utilized in the physique space over the coming years. I think a lot of people do whatever edge they can to compete and keep competing, especially as long as you just got to keep showing up and putting your face out there, and they'll recognize you eventually. As long as that kind of gets to be the way and people don't work on improving and using the improvement system or season, I can see this being something that we're all seeing more of. And we have a lot of competitors who come to us, but I actually see the good in the product and I see the bad in the product. And I think it's one of those like testosterone and all the other hormone shit everyone does is handle with care and know why you're using it and be real clear on why you're using it with yourself. Like, don't try to lie to yourself about it. And I think as long as you can do that, you're pretty well okay to use a lot of these things, in my opinion.
I agree with that.
Yeah, grown adults just ruin it for everybody else is what the issue is. Jeff, where can everybody find you at, man?
First Call Out Fitness on Instagram. I'm on Facebook, Jeffrey Sue. Everything I post is public on Facebook. So if you want to take a class, take a look at some client transformations I'm working on. I post workshops. They're free every quarter. Keep in touch, check them out. But other than that, that's it.
Nice. B, where can everybody find you and follow you?
All right, guys, feel free to reach out to me at BrandonDeCruz_ on Instagram or on my email, which is bdecruzfitness@gmail.com. I just want to, on air, thank you, Jeffrey, for coming on. I really appreciate you tackling this topic. I know it's a complex one, and you really broke it down in an easy to understand format, which I really do appreciate. We've been getting questions about this for months on the podcast from our listeners and our viewers. And so I really wanted to bring someone on that I respect, that has a knowledge on a topic, that has experience, and then really be able to, dichotomize both sides of the equation, because often, we only highlight one, but we don't do the other. So I really want to get both sides of the equation. I appreciate you doing so, my friend.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, guys.
No, thanks, man. And y'all can find me, Jeff Unbreakable Black, on Instagram and Relentless Forever on YouTube. So I'll be doing a lot of stuff, including my weekly vlog. All right, dudes. Well, y'all have yourself a great day.
You too.
All right.
Later.
Peace.